Hello, I am Mimi Hicklin, and this is Reed Howell Hicklin. And welcome to Something to Talk About from the Bainbridge Island Senior Community Center, sponsored by Fieldstone Communities, Bainbridge Island. Fieldstone offers innovative and compassionate care and is now accepting residents. They also offer day stay and respite programs. Call 360-689-4314 to schedule a tour of Fieldstone's beautifully appointed apartments on Rolling Bay today. I would also like to acknowledge that the Senior Community Center is on the ancestral homeland of the Coast Salish people, specifically the Suquamish tribe, the people of the clear salt water. We honor them and are grateful for their hospitality.
Where is Grandpa?
Where is Grandpa? That is the burning question. Today, we are going to be talking about sea level rise and Bainbridge Island. Do you ever think about how sea level rise will affect Bainbridge Island and what we might do about it? EcoAdapt, through a grant from the Bainbridge Community Foundation, is undertaking a community survey and conversation to learn what concerns our friends and neighbors with respect to sea level rise on Bainbridge Island. Okay, let me finish and then you can go find Grandpa.
Can I take you to Grandpa?
No, I want to you.
I will. What concerns our friends and neighbors with respect to sea level rise on Bainbridge Island and what they see for our future?
I'm gonna pretend we're here.
Our future, Reed, who is pretending to work. We will talk with Deb Rudnick and Lara Hansen about the project, what they hope to learn, how they will apply that information, and how you can get involved. So without further ado, and so you don't have to listen to a squirrely toddler anymore, I'm going to just hand this right over to Lara and Deb. And thank you all for your patience as we cobble this together.
All good. We're all cobbling everything together every day, so no rough edges seen here. Thrilled to have all of you joining us, and those of you who will watch this video later on. Deb and I are really excited to be in the midst of a project that's funded by the Bainbridge Community Foundation to begin a community conversation around sea level rise, what we can do about it, what it means for us, what decisions we need to make today to have the tomorrow that we want. We're going to share a little bit about some past studies on sea level rise that are relevant to Bainbridge Island, as well as a survey that we're undertaking that we're hoping all of you will participate in, as well as share with your friends and neighbors so that we can get as many opinions as we can as we try to guide a conversation. I'm going to attempt to get to the next slide. First, I'm going to tell you a little bit about EcoAdapt. So I'm Lara Hansen. I'm one of the co-founders of EcoAdapt. We're a nonprofit 501c3 organization based here on Bainbridge Island, but we do work across the country and often around the world. We were founded in 2008. We have done myriad things, as this slide shows. All of this is available on our website, ecoadapt.org. One of the things, though, that we find important is that as we work across the country and around the world, is that we learn lessons about what is working and what is not working in terms of how we prepare for the challenges of climate change. And we want to apply that in the place that we live. We feel that it's very difficult often for smaller communities to have the resources to make climate action happen. And we've been taking it upon ourselves over the past several years, starting with some support of the comprehensive plan update during the last decade, through development of some other tools we're going to talk about, to serving on the Climate Change Advisory Committee, to just providing support wherever we can. But we're not the only ones who thought that that's important. There are a number of other resources that we'll be sharing over the course of this that are things that informed and concerned community members have helped to take on to advance our understanding of the implications of climate change here on Bainbridge Island, and to hopefully make us less vulnerable to the challenges that it brings. So I always like to start with some grounding from a sage climate advisor, Yogi Berra, who said the future ain't what it used to be. One of the things about climate change is that it alters our understanding of how the world works and what are the conditions around us. And that makes it important in our recognition that climate change is in fact an everyday issue. It's not something we need to worry about in the future. It's something that we are part of causing right now and are part of developing strategies to address right now. Do not put off tomorrow what we must be doing today is really what I think Yogi Berra was trying to say when he said that. There are few decisions that we make every day that are not affected by climate change and that do not affect climate change. So our choices in transportation, our choices in use of energy to heat our houses and cook our food, all determine the greenhouse gases that go up into the atmosphere that are warming the planet and causing an array of other impacts that I'll talk about in a moment. And our choices of where we site things and where we build them and how we build them determine the vulnerability of those built constructs, so roads and houses and sewage treatment plants and what have you for the future, but also how we manage natural resources is affected by climate change and affects climate change, and decisions we make should be aware of that fact. So in 2016, colleagues and I put together what we called the Bainbridge Island Climate Impact Assessment. It had 3 goals and motivations. The first was to understand the impacts of climate change for Bainbridge Island. The second was to translate the implications of climate change for various local areas of interest. So things like water resources, housing, basically the same things that are the elements of the comprehensive plan. So we could make it easy to use for that process. And the third was to move our community towards actions that will have real impact to create a resilient Bainbridge Island. And we did this because of what I just said in the previous slide. We need to set ourselves up to be able to make decisions that will have better long-term outcomes. The Bainbridge Island Climate Impact Assessment was funded through a combination of funding sources, including the Bainbridge Community Foundation, as well as the Bullitt Foundation located in Seattle. This was so popular that we were asked by the Bullitt Foundation to create a version of it that could be used by any community in the Puget Sound region. So we generalized it, and it was actually used by a number of other communities as they updated their comprehensive plans. There's content and questions in this that can help guide decision-making processes in various areas where our local government currently works, as well as where many of us live and also work. So the 4 big climate impact categories that are generally identified are temperature, precipitation, sea level rise, and ocean acidification. And all the other things flow out of those 4 changes. The temperature rise, just to give you a sense of that, although we're not going to talk much about temperature, is that we've already risen over 1.3 degrees Fahrenheit. And this was according to a report that's actually a few years old now by the University of Washington Climate Impact Group. I should actually update the number just based on what we can get off the records as opposed to what's in their report. There are 2 lines here you see that are kind of choices of where we could go in the future. One is a high emissions scenario under which we continue to emit at the rate we are. The other is a low emissions scenario. To date, prior to the Paris Agreement coming into force, we're on that high emissions scenario trajectory. If in fact we were all really to live up to what's in the Paris Agreement, we would be lower than that. We might even make that low emissions scenario, but we need to do even better than that because we do not want to get to 6 degrees Fahrenheit by the end of the century. We would like to get to no higher than 1.5 degrees Fahrenheit or 1.5 degrees Celsius by the end of the century. So there's a little bit of a translation there. I need to fix that too. Apologies for not converting all of that to one unit or the other. But we're here to talk about sea level rise. And in 2016, when we did the Bainbridge Island Climate Impact Assessment, we looked at what the projections were then And we identified a number of places around the island where, with the projected amount of sea level rise over the course of this century, there would be a lot of inundation. And this is based on old projections. The projections have actually been upped again. So the area that would be in light blue today is actually a bit bigger. But to take you on a walk of where these 3 spots are, which were just the 3 that we figured had the greatest impact to people across the community, not just private landowners. First, there's the sand spit up at the north end of the island. I believe that's more commonly known as Point Monroe. Is that correct, Deb? It will be completely inundated. It already has, during high tides, very high levels of flooding. It's not only the people that live in those houses that will be affected by that, but it's all of the utilities and services that go out to there will be damaged by that, and all of the septic systems that are sitting out there, which will be damaged by that. Decisions are going to have to be made by the people who live there and the services that are provided over time. We need to start figuring out what that solution set looks like. The upper right-hand image, that's down by Linwood Center. And there's a road that runs right along that area that is inundated. And it's one of the only 2 ways, the continuing road that takes you out around Point White. And so that has implications for not only the people who live there, but transportation to and from that area. And then the image on the bottom is obviously Eagle Harbor. And there are points of inundation. One of those is out by Pritchard Park, Creosote Point, which is where there is a Superfund site. Fortunately, EPA is aware of their the climate threat from sea level rise, and has been trying to implement strategies to make it less vulnerable. But much of that requires hardening. And one of the challenges with hardening is that when you harden one location, that water goes somewhere. So we're adding stress in other locations by requiring that there be hardening around a highly contaminated site, which you certainly do want to keep isolated. The other place that I'd like to point your attention to is at the far left end of this image, which is the head of Eagle Harbor. And as pretty much everybody probably knows, there is a road that runs right along, pretty much at water grade, along the head of Eagle Harbor, and then up around the south side at the beginning there. Those pieces of infrastructure are all vulnerable. And again, that's one of 2 roads that gets to the entire south end of the island. That's a serious pinch point for our planning. But those low bank areas aren't the only places to be concerned about with sea level rise. One of the other things that sea level rise does is that can affect slope stability. As sea level rises, high bank waterfront can also become vulnerable as continued erosion from water reaches new locations on the shoreline and can undermine banks. This is just an exercise in looking at the Washington Department of Ecology slope stability maps along coastal regions of Bainbridge Island, and highlighting some of the places that are more unstable and more concerning in relation to sea level rise. However, this is all pretty old data at this point. So a colleague on the Climate Change Advisory Committee, where I used to serve, did in 2019 an updated sea level rise study as one of his parting gifts to the community before he left the advisory committee. He still lives on Bainbridge Island, and his name is James Rufo Hill. Huge appreciation for him taking this on. Deb is going to take, my colleague Deb Rudnick is going to take you on a run through what the findings were in that report. Over to you.
Thanks, Lara. Yeah, so I'm just going to touch on a few of the highlights that James provided, and I will I'll caveat this too by saying even since James did this work, we've had some updates to our sea level rise projections, particularly looking farther out into the future. And so what James looked at, particularly in the long term, might be considered at this point a bit conservative compared to where we think sea level rise might be heading. But that being said, he did point to some points of vulnerability in particular, and I think Lara touched on several of these in the last few slides, but some of the things that he highlighted in his report were good news being that a lot of our infrastructure is not immediately vulnerable to sea level rise, and we are fortunate in having some pretty steep topography, and a lot of our infrastructure is pretty much out of harm's way with respect to this particular impact. But we do have some sewer service infrastructure. We do, as Lara already pointed out, have some low-lying streets that are already experiencing occasional inundation, particularly during very high tide events. And those are areas we really need to be focusing our attention moving forward. Next slide, Laura, if you might. So as Lara was intimating, particularly when we were talking about places like Point White and Point Monroe, there really are some significant potential repercussions for some private property owners around our island's shorelines. And, you know, a lot of folks are already seeing some nuisance flooding, particularly associated with king tides or very high tides. But by the middle of the century, we'll really be looking at some serious inundation issues that need to be addressed, and also that additional issue that Lara mentioned regarding accelerated bluff erosion, potentially destabilizing some high banks. And that is a real concern that we need to be looking at. Next slide. So I think Lara already touched on several of these. We have some areas that are clearly already relatively low lying in terms of both properties and roads that access these properties and other neighborhoods that are really, the roads are a major access point too. So those include the Sandspit, as well as Manitou Beach, Murden Cove area, and the Shell-Shelled Estuary Point White Drive area. We do have some community assets at risk, which Lara already mentioned, the Wyckoff site, our Washington State Ferries maintenance yard, and ferry terminal are in a low-lying area. We have a major park, Bainbridge Park, that's up near that Sandspit as well. And of course, some components of the wastewater treatment plant that the city is pretty well aware of and starting to take a look at. We also do not currently experience anything significant in terms of saltwater intrusion. This is something the city is looking at, particularly in our near shore well systems, but that will increasingly become an issue that we need to keep an eye on, the potential for saltwater intrusion, particularly in wells that are close to the shoreline. Next slide. Lara, do you want to touch base on adaptation here for a moment? I can pass that back to you.
You bet. I will jump back in again. So one of the reasons we're doing this survey is that the solution set for what we do about climate change and especially sea level rise is unknown. We as a community have to figure out what we want to do. What is it that we value? What resources do we have? What ideas can we create? There is no guidebook on exactly what we should be doing. There are ideas that other communities are trying, and we can share hundreds of those with you. We run a website called the Climate Adaptation Knowledge Exchange, cakex.org, that is full of examples of what other communities are doing in response to climate change. But everyone is doing something unique, and we have to come up with our own idea set. And what might be the right idea for Bainbridge Island may not have even been thought of yet. And so we really want to stimulate the community conversation that helps us figure out how do we address the needs and concerns of private property owners, the needs and concerns of the city for running a city, and the needs and concerns of all of our friends and neighbors who are also affected by this. So one of the tool that you use in addressing those effects of climate change is called adaptation. And it's a means of preparing for and responding to the effects of climate change in order to diminish the risk and improve the likelihood of achieving the outcomes we desire. At the same time, you want to be working on mitigating climate change by reducing greenhouse gas emissions of fossil fuels. But for the purposes of thinking about sea level rise, our local response is largely about adaptation. That said, there was a study in the New York Times last week that Deb and I were just looking at that showed that the carbon footprint of our community is disproportionately high. So we are causing the problem that is damaging our community, and we must also address that. We have to figure out how to use fewer fossil fuels. Ideally, using no fossil fuels would be a really good pathway there. But on the adaptation side, which is what this survey is about, every time I try to do something with my screen, I move my mouse, and then the tool for moving forward no longer works. It's very frustrating. I can't adjust my microphone and run a slideshow, apparently. So climate change responses can be thought of in terms of three approaches. One is resistance, which is you just stop it. You make it so that it's as David Byrne would say in the Talking Heads, it's the same as it ever was. So this is building seawalls. So when I talked about the seawall that's going in at the Wyckoff site, that's resistance. That's how do we stop sea level rise from happening. Resilience can be thought of in terms of these houses that they've been building in the Netherlands that actually can rise up with sea level rise. They float, they're on posts, they're able to move. They won't be inundated because they'll stay above the water line. Then the last version is response. That's you just say, well, we can't live here anymore because the water is too high, and you take up stakes and you move your tent somewhere else. So those are sort of the three categories of the kinds of things we could do. I do not want you to think of these in terms of we should build giant brick walls, we should build floating houses, or we should get tents. These are metaphors. I am sharing three metaphorical ideas with you. One is that we try to stop it. The other is we try to live with the change. And the third is we say, we can't live with that change anymore. We're going to go do what we need to do in another location. All of those could be part of the solution set. We may choose solutions that have elements of all three of these things. These things may happen over time. We may start with, in the near term, we're going to do a little bit of resistance because we don't have the money to move a road, or we don't know where to move a house. And then eventually we move into the resilience or response as time progresses. But the farther ahead we can start looking, the fewer things we go into a resistance approach with, we can probably come up with better outcomes over the long term rather than creating more problems for ourselves, which is often what resistance approaches end up doing. So the Washington chapter of the American Planning Association had a discussion paper in 2015 that stated that there was already enough information available to make good decisions. And here we are 7 years later, almost 8 years later. And I wanted to re-impress upon everyone that communities can make good decisions when they have information, understand what it means for them, and co-develop good ideas. And really this project that Deb and I are talking to you about is about co-developing good ideas. We don't know what the options are that are our solution set for Bainbridge Island. Nobody knows what that is yet. We need to start thinking about it rather quickly, come up with some things and implement them in a way that is equitable, effective, and meets the value set that we have as a community. So 2 things we're going to leave you with at the end. One is that our dear friend, Jeanette Franks, who is a local author, recently put out this book. We're giving her a little plug here because chapter 7 of that book is called Interconnected, Interwoven Intersections, which is just fun to say. And it talks about how do you think about and act on climate change. So that's a good associated read for those of you who are interested in supporting a local author and doing a little bit of a deeper dive. But the real reason we're chatting with you today is our survey, and I'm going to turn it back over to Deb, and she's going to share a little bit more with you about what we're asking and what we're hoping you'll share.
Yeah, thanks, Lara. So our ask at the end of this presentation is really to engage you. We would love to ask you if you would like to take our survey. It's brief. It should take you less than 10 minutes to complete. And you are really helping us to learn more about what concerns you with respect to sea level rise and your ideas. As Lara says, we don't have a solution set. We have some ideas. There's certainly conversations that are starting. We want to have some more conversations. And we think the more folks, the better in a conversation like this, generating more ideas and generating more awareness about some of these impacts and decisions to be made. So if you take our quick survey, I will pop the link in the chat here shortly, and maybe Mimi could make this available in association with the video as well. That would be awesome. If you click the link to the survey, for those of you who are savvy with your camera, you can point your phone camera at that little QR code and get to it that way too. And you also have the chance to enter into a drawing, little incentive here, and to win a gift card to local business. So that's a nice added bonus to giving us your opinions. And next slide, Lara. Yeah, so basically when you go into the survey, you will be asked to share a little bit about yourself. If you're anywhere on Bainbridge, you are welcome and encouraged to take the survey. It'll ask you a little bit of information about where you live, what kind of property you live on, whether you're close to the shoreline or have a low or high waterfront, things like that. Some basic information about yourself. Tell us if sea level rise is something that currently concerns you, if you see it as a now problem, you see it as a future problem. An opportunity to tell us a little bit more about what you're thinking, and if you have any ideas at this point about what might be done, what might we do as a community, what might we do individually. We want to hear from you. It's an opportunity to gather some of this information together. And we will also ask you if you're interested and willing to join us in further conversation. We'll follow up with folks that are open to that possibility with some small one-on-one or small group conversations. And we'll also ask you if you're willing to come back and maybe take the survey with us again a little bit down the road once we've had some of these community conversations. That's really what the survey is all about.
And just to give you a little bit more to entice you to say yes to the follow-up survey. The follow-up survey, we're going to hopefully combine a lot of the ideas that people have offered up over the course of the first survey and the community conversation and put them out there for people to sort of weigh in on and say, I think this is a great idea, or I'm really frightened about this idea, or I would love to learn more about this idea. I have no idea what you're talking about. We're game for all of that so that we can learn more. So again, Deb has put the link in the chat. You'll be getting it in your inbox. We'll put the QR code back up at the very end for anyone who missed it and wants to get it. And please share it with everyone you can. We're really trying to get a very large sample of Bainbridge Island. I think we're currently hovering at about 1% of Bainbridge Island. We'd like to get a lot more than 1% of Bainbridge Island responding to this survey. So please help us get the word out. Send it to whatever groups you're part of that are local. And we thank you. If you have any questions, you can feel free to ask them now, or you can email them to me. We are here to chat with you about this.
Thank you so much. I am going to open it up to anybody here who may have questions for Deb and Lara. Just go ahead and unmute yourself. I can only speak for myself, but I will speak for myself. So I love the approach of asking for community response. I think that people are more inclined to participate should they feel invested in these conversations. I also have to admit that your verbiage that nobody knows what our best options for Bainbridge are freaks me out. So is there a version of this survey ongoing conversation that involves expert advice?
Yeah, so we'll get to that. We didn't want to pre-insert that. I mean, part of the goal here is that from the work that we've been doing across the country, I'm not convinced anyone's landed on what the right solution is yet, because there's a lot of complexity here. You have a very large percentage of the population of Bainbridge Island lives on our shoreline. For most people, your single largest investment in your life is your home. That being vulnerable is very challenging. You can't just ask people to abandon their house and the value that's in it if that's part of their savings plan, their ability to live. And so we have to come up with solutions around that. I don't know of any place that's addressing that well. We also have to come up with solutions around the fact that we have some pretty limited infrastructure. We have some serious infrastructure bottlenecks on this island that are very vulnerable to sea level rise. So it's not just coastal property owners who are affected by this, or coastal renters who are affected by this. It's people who have to get to the north and have to get north of the south end of the island every day. It's people who need to get to whole neighborhoods and community centers, like in Rolling Bay. There's a lot of or people who live down on Point White. Like, there's a lot of access issues we're going to have to deal with. There's infrastructure issues running along and under a lot of those roads are many of our electrical utilities. We have to deal with all of that. There's a lot nested in this problem that we need to be thinking about. And by and large, when solutions are developed to sea level rise, they tend to be done as in piecemeal, like, we'll deal with this hazard right now. They don't think about it in the more holistic manner.
Right.
Rita,
And
go ahead. Sorry.
I just, in response to that, I was going to say, like you said, that makes the solution sort of necessarily very community specific. So depending on how each community. So I guess, to sort of piggyback on your own answer to my question, the expertise would come from a variety of different fields, right? Not just sea level experts.
Right. I mean, so there's the expertise that you can get that comes out of what do we know about sea level rise? So what do we need to be planning for? But then there's the component that is like, what is the local desire for what we need to do, which again needs to be informed by what size culverts do you need to put under things? Do you need to build bridges? What will happen to soil with this happening underneath it? Like, there's a lot of technical pieces in there as well that we'll have to get advice on, but we do just first need to figure out what is it we want to do. And there's an expression that is said often in the adaptation field, which is that all adaptation is local. And there's a lot of it that is just, how do we adjust our local planning, both personally and governmentally, to respond to the reality that we now live in.
Thank you. Rita, I'm handing it to you.
Oh, thanks, Mimi. My concern is, are you guys working at all with the city currently? Because there is, I mean, I know a little bit, I haven't looked at a lot, but I know that some of the pump stations are not only old, but they are in places that they absolutely should not be. That there are culverts that are, some of the sewer system stuff is old. And when I listen to the city council meetings, I don't really, hear a lot about what needs to be done. And they're talking about maybe moving one up a little bit or doing some things, and then they could move it further, but it would cost too much money or cost a lot more money. And my concern is that that it's not being taken real seriously. And it's a real serious thing. If we do not get this infrastructure and get it so that, and that we're not only safe, but we're not polluting Puget Sound, it's a real problem. I mean, I'm old, so I'm not going to be here in 50 years, but my kids and grandkids are.
I think the problem is nearer term than that. But I'll start this. I think Deb probably has a more sophisticated answer she can give than what I'm going to give. So we are not working directly with the city. This is a grant to EcoAdapt from the Bainbridge Community Foundation. That said, at the end of our process, we will certainly be sharing the outcome of what we do with the city and plan to make a presentation to council. We're going to ask if we can, based on what we find, but we'll be writing up a short report that can be shared community-wide, and council and city staff are both in our target dissemination audience at the end, but everyone on the island is, because a lot of these decisions are probably going to be sub-ideal for some reason. They're either going to cost money, they're going to change zoning, and we all have to get there together to be able to overcome the challenges that are appearing before us.
Yeah, and I mean, I'll add to that too, Lara. So I currently sit on the city's climate change advisory committee, and we work pretty closely with the various departments in the city. That being said, we are not doing this as part of the city. We're doing this kind of as an independent community engagement activity. But yes, to Lara's point, we definitely want to provide this feedback, and we think it'll be helpful because to go back to this idea that there are lots of technical aspects of this, my sense from what I know of what the city is working on is there are certainly pieces of this they are already picking up on and concerned about, particularly around the wastewater treatment plant. They are not ignorant of the fact that we have some real challenges in terms of access roads, the assets that they are responsible for. They are pretty well aware. But the political and community will and interest of what direction those things take, as you well know, are big decisions, and they're difficult ones, right? Because there's lots of competing interests and limited budget. So there's a component of this where it's to my mind, it's very important for a couple of reasons to go out into the community and ask these questions. One, we want to make sure everyone's really well aware of what is likely to be going on. Two, we want to empower people to think about how might I engage in being a part of this solution. And three, we want to potentially build some will for, okay, well, as a community, what are the decisions that make sense to us that we really want to get behind and where we want to push for change. So I think, those are all conversations you have to, definitely the city obviously has a very important role to play, particularly when it comes to city assets and infrastructure, but then we also all need to be part of the conversation as well.
Thank you. I'm going to have one last call for questions. Okay. Well, we really appreciate you coming on and speaking about this. And I will make sure to get the survey link out. I see it's here. So I'm just going to grab that. And that will go out along with the recording in the next few days. So look for that in your inbox. And again, so appreciate you being here today.
Thank you so much, Mimi.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity to present. And thank you, Reed, as well. I hope you come up with some great solutions. We're counting on you. Probably
in the form of hybrid cars, because he is vehicle obsessed.
Oh, excellent. That's very important.
Yes, and thank you all again for your grace with me. So really
absolute
pleasure.
That. And thank you all again. Please share the survey with friends, neighbors, not friends, vague acquaintances, whomever you see. Say, hey, this is really important. We need to discuss this as a city.